Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Hisham Khaki. He's the president and founder at HapiGig and also ShiftSwap. So we're going to talk a little bit about how he came to found HapiGig and how ShiftSwap has come out of that as an offering that they have as well, and a little bit about his background. He is an operations guy, just like myself as well. And he saw a problem in the market and he went after it. And we're going to dive into that today. So, Hisham, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Doing great. How are you, Kevin?
Doing well, doing well. Happy to get you on here. Happy definitely to talk about happy gig, we could say there a little bit, right?
I'm happy as
But
well.
definitely Yeah, so definitely interested to dive into this, and obviously, focused on certainly a pain point. I think always in some matters is labor for sure in the industry. So, I guess before we kind of dive a little bit more into that discussion, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your background and how you ultimately came to found this company?
Perfect. Thank you again, Kevin. Rather than giving the same old background spiel, I went to college, I started working, I worked more, I worked more, I worked more. It's kind of boring that way. But let me start with a quick story because I think it's super important for people to understand how really the mission and purpose for Happy Gig and Shift Swap came to be evolved. And I'm going to start with the story. It was about 15 years ago. And this was actually back in my engineering days. And I was part of a team where we were rolling out lean, so lean warehousing across our
Mm.
organization. Worked for a major 3PL back then. And I know you're familiar with lean, but we were doing a Kaizen event. And I'm sure you're familiar with how Kaizen events work, Kevin.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So for those of you out there, Kaizen events are really, really neat. You bring in hourly associates from the floor, and they actually participate in a continuous improvement project anywhere from 2, 3, even 5 days. So we're doing this Kaizen event. It was in McDonough, Georgia, and 1.5 million square foot facility, large facility. We've got our group. We're working on, I think it was either the returns process or value added services. But to help you all understand like how a Kaizen event works, you bring these people in, you observe the current state, you start thinking about solutions, improvements for the process. You test out your theory, you create a new SOP, you implement, the premise of it is you're really getting insight from the people actually doing the work every day.
Mm.
So we're doing this Kaizen event, and at the end of it, you give out awards to all the people who are participated. Right? You give them a plaque or a certificate that's framed, has the president's signature on it, VP's signature. So we're going through this process at the end. It was a really successful Kaizen event. And I'll never forget the associate. His name was Dennis Gilpin. And he'd
Okay.
been working at this warehouse for probably a couple of decades.
Mm.
And we give him his framed certificate, and he literally sheds a tear. Like I'm not exaggerating. Like not he wasn't watering up. He literally shed a tear. And I looked at him and I was like, Dennis, what's up, buddy? Like, are you all right?
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he just goes, Hisham, like my wife is going to be so proud of me when I come home with this.
Mm.
And my family is going to be so proud of me. I've never done anything like this. And at that moment, it became crystal clear to me that my professional purpose is to help improve the lives of warehouse workers.
Mm.
Fast forward, as you said, I went into operations, and I really went into operations because I felt like I could impact more people's lives. And we're doing a startup, a greenfield startup, which Kevin, you and I, when we were talking earlier, we have a
Yeah.
shared story of a startup. So, and any of you out there who have done startups know that they can they can get a bit rocky at times.
Yeah,
And this particular startup,
definitely.
super rocky. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. To put in perspective, every Thursday night, I'm literally calling every general manager I've got across the US, across my Canadian sites, and seeing who can fly clamp truck operators to Joliet, Illinois. And and this is just to clear the yard. So unload trailers, make sure we don't stop our customer supply chain. So every weekend we're doing this for like a couple of months. You can
Mm,
imagine the cost associated with it. And one night I'm in my hotel room in my Hampton Inn in Manuka, and I'm looking out the window and I'm just like staring at a sea of warehouses, like
mm,
literally, tens and tens of warehouses. And the thought occurred to me, we're flying all these people to unload trailers. But I know there's got to be hundreds, if not thousands, of people right here that would love to pick up extra hours. So the seed was planted. Fast forward, we fixed the operation. Everything's running smoothly. But all of a sudden, we've got some of our best operators leaving. And I'm asking them, hey, John, why are you leaving? We finally fixed this place. We've got a good leadership team in place. We're meeting customer demand. Everything's great. And they look at me and they say, Hisham, yeah, it is great, but can't live off 40 hours. Can't live off 40 hours a week.
mm,
I can't live without the overtime. And it was like a punch in the gut that we finally fixed this place, but people are leaving to go down the street to another place in meltdown mode just to get the overtime.
mm,
And that's when it occurred to me that, wow, there are all these great warehouse associates that want to improve their lives. They want to pick up extra shifts. They want to work extra hours. Then you've got all these warehousing employers that need flexible labor. If there was a way to connect them, it could be a win-win. And that's how HapiGig was born.
mm,
Um, Fast forward from there, we went through COVID. Everything was going great. We're finding great people that needed extra hours. We're connecting them with employers. But then post COVID, a lot of our customers started saying, hey, this is great, but we want to focus on our own staff. Like we need to create flexibility for our own associates. And that's when ShiftSwap was born. And that's really the evolution and where we're currently at with flexibility in the workforce.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I love that story. I mean, I think it's so powerful, and I mean, it highlights that in the warehouse itself. I mean, you have these employees that they really, and I'll say, not every employee in the warehouse cares necessarily about their job, right? But you have these ones that are dedicated, they're passionate about their role, and sometimes, I think not every company, but a lot of companies kind of overlook the importance of that warehouse worker on the floor, right? And so sometimes when you have these workers and they get that kind of recognition, like you mentioned there, it's really impactful to them. And I think they want to have flexibility, just like somebody in the office might have some flexibility, right? But sometimes I think traditionally that's been hard to figure out or manage in that sense. But I think you pointed to the pandemic, right? Certainly that kind of highlighted a lot of these flexible type of work situations and open new opportunities for people that are like at that level, maybe, or they could do something different. And that certainly caused a lot of the challenges we've seen with the hourly workforce in the warehouse itself. So I mean, I guess before we kind of dive into the flexibility there and how shift swap works and everything, tell us a little bit about kind of right now, what are you seeing in terms of like challenges with the hourly workforce? I mean, are we still seeing same issues that we saw during pandemic? Is it gotten a little better? What seems to be kind of some of the big challenges that are out there in the market right now?
So finding talent is not as hard as it was during the pandemic, but retaining them is just as hard, if not harder.
Mm,
And that, I was looking at a study a few months ago. I think 77% of 3PLs out there are saying that their number one struggle right now is attracting, training, and retaining their talent.
Mm,
So it's still a problem, and I think it continues to grow. The workforce continues to grow. I think it's been a 40% growth over the past 4 years.
mm,
So it's a challenge. I mean, you find people, but they leave a few weeks later. It's not meeting their requirements. So yeah, it's definitely still a big challenge.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, certainly one of the hard parts, right? Because, people ask me often about, what does the labor landscape look like and things like that. And I'm like, well, it's the one thing, right? To get them in the door, right? But then how do you keep them inside the door, right? Essentially. And I think, that is a testament to what you're saying there. I mean, is that retention of the employee. So, and I think you mentioned, you were in this hotel room, going through this, difficult go live and stuff, looking out the window, right? Probably, half contemplating, oh, what am I doing here? But also seeing, this sea of warehouses, right, in these areas, right? And we see, I'm in New Jersey here, and it's densely populated with warehouses in certain pockets, and there's pockets of the country that are like that, right? Which also makes, maybe the opportunity for the hourly warehouse workforce to have multiple opportunities because their skill set is transferable to all these different warehouses, but then also makes it competitive for the warehouse companies themselves because somebody that works there is like, well, I could like go 3 warehouses down the street and probably get a job too, no problem. So tell us a little bit about, like, why is there a challenge around retention, like as you're interfacing with some of these workers and talking to these warehousing companies? What is really standing out right now as a challenge for having that retention and keeping that retention percentage high?
So so pay is still king, right? It's still the
Mm,
number one thing associates are looking for is a good pay, but not far behind it nowadays. And number two is flexibility.
mm,
And this has been going on now for a couple of years. And like you mentioned, the hourly workforce saw this revolution that the white collar workforce went through, where all of a sudden they have all this flexibility, but they didn't get any of that, right? Their form of flexibility is still the point system, which is if I need a day off to take my child to the doctor, I'm just going to call out sick, and that's going to give me a point, and I know I've got 10 points before I get terminated, and I'm just going to play the points game and leverage that for my flexibility. And that's literally how they're approaching it. So the number one reason for turnover in almost every warehouse is absenteeism. And that absenteeism typically comes from these warehousing associates needing to live their life, needing to take care of their families, needing some time off here and there. So when they don't have that, they just they take the absentees, they get terminated, they go to the next place. And it's just a
mm.
continuous cycle that goes on.
Yeah, so I mean that flexibility I think is such a important thing, and I think you mentioned there, like during the pandemic, it kind of highlighted that almost stark difference, right? In a sense, for someone that works in the office, right? As I've heard some people refer to, the carpet walkers versus the concrete walkers, right? In a sense, so you have more flexibility in the office, I guess, because like there's not necessarily that physical aspect, right? I mean, you can't really, pick orders or pack boxes from your house, right? And I think the pandemic certainly highlighted that. And like you mentioned, that flexibility is important. And, in a lot of scenarios, and, being a former warehouse manager and having the hourly workforce team and stuff, I mean, you certainly see that where it's, yeah, like, your workers, like you said, they want to, their child is sick, right? But, they don't necessarily have the excuse or the note based on the handbook and all these things for the hourly workers, and so they get a ding on their absenteeism or something like that, or a point, as you mentioned. And I think that's such a traditional kind of way of looking at it, right? But the reality is that there's other opportunities, I think, out there now for that type of employee, where there is more flexibility, right? Whether it's, going into like a gig economy type of situation, or, maybe doing something different, right? I mean, there's a lot of remote work now available for all different levels. So, I think having that flexibility can certainly help to increase that retention, and can certainly be a competitive advantage almost, right, for a company. So tell us a little bit about how you're kind of addressing that challenge and helping operations to be able to accommodate more of this stuff that's going on, and have more flexibility for their employees.
So Kevin, so you've got a couple different things. You've got the fact that employers out there, I mean, being an ops manager, your biggest challenge was probably always matching your labor with your volume.
Mm.
One
Yeah.
day you've got 25% less volume, the next day you've got 30% more volume, and constantly trying to manage that to hit your cost per unit. I mean, it is probably, if not the number one struggle of an ops manager, it typically is the number one struggle. So you've got
Yeah.
that, right? Then you've got the fact that you've got a lot of associates that want to pick up extra hours. They're looking for ways to improve their lives. I
Mm.
call one of our associates or users every month, and I hear the craziest stories. I'll call them up and I'll tell them, "Hey, how are you using the extra money you're making from our solutions?" And I'll hear stories like, my son is the first person to ever go to college, and I'm so thankful that I get to work these extra hours because now I can give him pocket money. Or I had
Mm.
one person tell me, my dream was to start a baking company. I'm saving all this extra money to purchase a van so I can deliver cookies. Or another story. I mean, there's story after story. This one person, her mother was sick, and she was using this money to pay for her medication. So
Mm.
you've got the challenge of operations leadership trying to manage variability to staffing. You've got associates that want extra hours, right? And then you've got associates that want time off. And then the last part, which is the key, is all of these associates all still want one thing in common, which is to work at a full-time employer. What we figured out with HapiGig was that they don't want to be like an Uber driver of warehousing. They still want the
Mm.
name on their paycheck to be consistent, but they want the flexibility
Okay.
within it.
Mm.
So if you take those four variables, right, and then you create a platform that allows you to uh, basically tap into the people that want extra hours, the people that want time off, the variability you have. That's when the magic can happen in a warehouse, and you can really match that labor to your demand.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's such a great point there, because I know from my experience too. Certainly, we're coming in, and it's like, oh, we have this many orders to get out the door today, and then you go and go with your supervisor or whatever, and it's like, oh, well, I got X amount of call outs today, right? And then it's like, oh, what am I going to do, right? But if you could bring in some flexible workers there or something, or offer that up in a way to say like, hey, there's extra hours to be had today, I'm sure there's a bunch of people that would jump at that opportunity. But how do you do that, in a systemized kind of, formal or practical way to be able to do that? And it sounds like that's kind of what you're bringing to the table here with ShiftSwap. So I guess tell us a little bit about, how exactly does ShiftSwap work? How does it work for the operator? And then how does it work for like the employee too on that side? How does that kind of match these shifts up, and, give access to, I guess, essentially more capacity for the operator, and then more opportunity for the worker themselves?
So what's interesting is a lot of this could be done manually, and in the past, a lot of ops leaders, you'll manually post overtime, or you'll try
Yeah.
to tell people, hey, if you don't want to work, our volume's low, you can take voluntary time off. The problem
mm,
with that always is you start to get favoritism. You start to get,
mm,
some associates coming to you and saying, hey, Kevin, how come you always pick Michael for overtime? How come I never get selected?
yeah,
Right? And
yeah,
then and then the VTO is even more difficult. Oh, Kevin, how come you let John take voluntary time off? I didn't get the chance to sign up for this.
mm,
So inevitably, what happens is ops leaders get a little lazy and they don't want to deal with those headaches. And instead of saying they need 10% of their workforce to stay over, they just call mandatory overtime. And that's just easier,
mm,
right? You just say, hey, entire shift has to stay over until the volume's out. Or, rather than trying to send people home, I'll just have people push brooms around the warehouse. And all of that just
mm,
leads to inflated costs. So with ShiftSwap, all of that becomes automated. So from the employer's perspective, so the ops leader, they're able to post overtime, they're able to post voluntary time off. All the associates that have the right skill set, they'll receive the notifications at the same time. They can grab the shifts when they want to. Leadership can approve it or deny it. So it just seamlessly automates that whole process from the leader's perspective. Now, from the
mm,
associate's perspective, not only can they grab this overtime and grab voluntary time off, but they can also post portions of their shift. So let's say I'm an associate at a warehouse, and tomorrow, I have a doctor's appointment. Typically, what would happen is I would wait until an hour before my shift, call out sick, deal with the points.
yeah,
Operation deals with absenteeism, and we just move forward. What the associates do with shift swap is they'll post a portion of their shift that they need covered, and then all the people within the operation that have that same skill set as that person will get notified. And if they want to pick up the extra hours, they simply grab it. And again, it goes
mm,
to leadership for approval. So now I can take those couple hours off to go to the doctor. Someone else is able to fill in for me within my operation. Everyone's happy. So it's just a simple way to match all of those variables up.
mm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's like such a great way to go about it because laughing there a little bit because I certainly have been in those conversations. Why is so and so getting overtime and not me, and this and that, and there's a whole explanation. Well, we only need overtime for what they're trained on, and you're not trained on that, and it's this whole back and forth, and for I guess anyone that's listening that's hasn't like managed warehouse employees and stuff. There's such a human element like to it, right? And dealing with all these different dynamics and trying to balance that. Certainly, you get to that point like you mentioned where a warehouse or ops manager is just like, well, instead of dealing with all these different personalities, this person saying like, "Oh, I don't wanna stay, and why are you asking me to stay, or why are you making me stay?" You're just saying like, "Okay, everybody's gonna stay," right? To make it easier, but then, like you said, then you're kinda picking up additional cost that maybe you don't necessarily need to have, where you could have more of like a pinpointed, focused, overtime shift or extra shift, whatever the case may be, on where you actually need the action, right? Because yes, it's great to, get the warehouse extra clean because you have, all these extra hands, doing 2 extra hours of overtime, that you actually don't really have enough orders to fulfill. But then at the same time, like, was that cost worth it at the end of the day? And I love a clean warehouse, I'll say, but, for overtime costs, not really.
And then
But,
think about and
I
then think
think,
about how many people are upset too. I mean, that's another leading.
yeah, yeah, because they're like, why am I
Yeah,
here?
it's like a
Yeah,
Friday night. I already had plans one time with
yeah,
with my friends, and now the supervisor tells me, "Hey, you've got to stay over." I'm
mm,
mad. It happens again next week. I'm more mad. Happens again. I get even more mad, and then I just say, "You know what? I'm out. I'll go down the street and go work somewhere
yeah.
else." And I quit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, it's finding that balance between because you have people that are like they love the overtime, like they want the overtime, and then you have people that are like, no, I'm good, 8 hours, like that's good for me, that's it,
Yeah.
right? And I think being able to add this layer in where kind of automates that and gives the visibility, and the people that want to take extra hours can grab them, the people that don't want to could just ignore it or whatever the case may be. But then even on the part there where you said this person has a doctor's appointment. We used to deal with that all the time where, people are like, well, I have a doctor's appointment. Can I leave for 2 hours and come back? And then, it was this whole thing of like, okay, well, let them leave for 2 hours, and then somebody else wants to leave for 2 hours, and then this whole thing. And, how do you balance that and manage that? And, I think the opportunity there for them to be able to post that and get it covered, right? Then, it doesn't really lead to like a management of the time issue, because that you're going to have some coverage there. And then on the same regard, people can feel like, okay, well, they can communicate this, not be punished in a sense for having to call out or take a couple hours. And instead of them just calling out for the day, maybe they're just not going to be there for a couple hours, and then they'll be there for the rest of the day. And I think that adds that flexibility that I think the workforce is kind of looking for and wanting to have from like a human standpoint. So really, really interesting stuff. I mean, I'm curious, I mean, where you've put this in place, how has it kind of impacted the operation? Have you seen like it attracts newer employees because of it? Has retention gone up? What kind of benefits have you seen from where you've implemented this?
Great question. So it starts with immediate reduction in absenteeism. Like that's the first
Mm,
thing our customers see is all of a sudden their daily absenteeism goes from 15 to 20%, which is what we typically see when we go into an operation, and immediately it'll go down to 5% or less. So that's the first
mm,
impact you see. The next impact is reduction in turnover. And we'll see warehouses go from, I mean, you know how varying warehouses are, but we'll see warehouses going from 15% turnover per month. Think about that. Like a 100
mm.
person operation, a lot of our customers in the beginning, they're literally turning over 15 people per month. Um,
Yeah, crazy.
and then it slowly starts trickling down, and then it'll get to, less than 1% per month. You've
Oh
got
wow.
absenteeism, then it impacts turnover, and then what pleasantly surprises so many ops leaders, they start to see a reduction in their cost per unit, and that's really
Mm,
because their leadership is better managing the overtime and the voluntary time off. And then
mm,
all of that leads to much better attraction of the workforce. So you'll see our customers like on Indeed, they'll actually mention the fact that they have a flexible program via ShiftSwap on their postings. And the employees talk and all of that, and all of a sudden you start becoming an employer of choice because you're actually taking care of your workforce.
yeah.
I think the biggest paradigm shift is that historically in warehousing, a lot of people believe that taking care of your workforce and taking care of your bottom line is mutually exclusive, right? And that's
Mm,
just not the case. Like if you're able to take care of them properly and leverage something like a shift swap, it will impact your bottom line for the better. And that's what just we're seeing right now.
mm. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, because it is, such a it's like a ripple effect almost, right? I mean, you start to make your workforce happier, give them, better accommodations, more flexibility and things like that. And then you start to see kind of those gains everywhere else, right? Because I mean, a disgruntled or unsatisfied worker is certainly not going to be like the most productive worker either, right? You tell somebody like, "Oh no, you can't take off tomorrow to go to your kid's thing at school because somebody else is already off, right?" And you just found out, well, oh, you need to give me 2 weeks notice, right, or something like that, right? Do you think like that person is going to come in and be super productive on that day? No, like they're gonna they're gonna hate you like for that day, right? I mean, so being able to add that in, I mean, I think just makes such a better workforce all around. And like you said, from the management perspective, being able to look more closely at these things and really understanding like, oh, okay, well, this is the reality of what we actually need, right? And we can make this happen now with ShiftSwap and this platform to be able to do that. I think is super important as well. And like you said, it goes down to the bottom line at the end of the day, but overall, becomes this happier ecosystem of just the workforce in general within your building. And I will say too, you mentioned in there that these employees, they start to talk, right? We talked about warehouses being right next to each other and densely populated warehouse towns. And yeah, they definitely talk, right? If you're a good operation or a bad operation, that word gets out there. And I've seen so many times where we hire somebody and they come in and right away they're like, "Oh, I know you. Like we worked together like 2 warehouses ago," or something like that. And so that gets out there, and I think that kind of gravitates people in as well. And I've seen where, developing a good culture and thing, I mean, you kind of have to recruit less in a sense because you have people that are referring people in, or people hear about it and they want to come and work in your warehouse and do those types of things. So really interesting what you're doing here, and I think really great. Very passionate about having the warehouse worker be recognized, and have them be able to have that flexibility and that same comfort level that any worker in an organization would have. Because to me, I mean, they make it happen at the end of the day, right? If you're selling a product, if your product doesn't get to the customer, you don't really have a business, right? In a sense, right? And the warehouse worker is really the one that enables that to happen as that last line of defense before it gets to your customer. So great stuff that you're doing here. I mean, as we look towards the future, we kind of talked in the beginning a little bit about current landscape of the hourly worker in the warehouse, but what are you seeing kind of in the next few years? How do you see that growing? I mean, obviously, warehousing is not going anywhere, but what does the landscape look like for that hourly worker?
Definitely, as you said, it's going to continue to grow for
Mhm.
sure. I think I think the big push that we're already seeing is going to really continue is employers don't want extra to tap into an external workforce. They don't want to
Yeah,
tap into temporary associates. They don't want to tap into that pool. And now with technologies like ShiftSwap, you don't have to anymore. And I think there's going to be
mm,
more and more of a focus on taking care of my own associates while ensuring that I'm able to match the labor to the volume.
mm,
And if we're able to do that, then you create your own gig economy within your own workforce. Everyone's happy. I mean,
yeah,
it's such a different world, and we've now seen like, and we didn't even expect this, but a lot of the shift swap customers, 6 months on the line, one of the things they'll tell me on one of our calls is, "Hey, we completely stopped using temp agencies," and they'd say
mm,
like, and that's a win.
wow,
That's a huge win for us. We weren't
yeah,
even expecting that, but it's happening over and over again. They don't want to rely on temp agencies. Even the external gig economy, which has become more mainstream within warehousing, they don't want any of that.
mm,
They want to create it internally.
mm. Yeah. I think that's super interesting because, yeah, I mean, temp agencies in a sense sometimes are kind of like a necessary evil. You find them in a little bit, and it can be a headache at times because you don't know what you're getting sometimes. And but if you can keep that internal, I mean, I think that's pretty amazing to hear that some of these customers have been able to just get themselves away from temp agencies. I think that's pretty incredible. And it just goes to show like how much kind of untapped kind of labor capacity you already have, but you just don't know how to kind of enable that and make that happen. So really interesting that you're putting that tool out there for people to be able to do that. So super interesting to talk to you. Love to hear about how you're addressing this and some of the experiences and stories that led up to the founding of this and ultimately putting this out there to make the hourly workforce have a better experience at work. I think that's a great thing. So, if people are interested in learning more about HapiGig and ShiftSwap, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, simple enough. Just go to www.shift-swap.com, sign up for a demo. What we always find is that once operations and HR are aligned, then from there it's simple. Go through a demo, and then once you decide you want to implement something like this, super simple. It takes less than a week to get it within your operation, and we guide you the entire way. But go to our website, check it out, shiftswap.com, shift-swap, and we'd love to take care of you.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well so people can easily find it. So, Hasham, thank you very much for joining me on the show today, sir.
Gavin, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesAreSexy.com and get your own.